Hi, Epiphany. It's great to see you today. It's a little bit rainy out there. The big pine cones are falling off the tree out in front of my house. It's called a Cedar Deodora, which is in the same family of the cedars of Lebanon. It's enormous. I love walking by it and thinking about the great, big, massive beams that were built in the Temple of Jerusalem out of trees just like that were cut down in Lebanon, and they were brought down the coast of the Mediterranean and then brought in and up to Jerusalem to build that incredible temple. So I think about that often when I'm out there. Isn't it nice the way things link together in our lives? I hope you're noticing things anew during this time of the great time out, right? You're appreciating memories in your life more. I wrote a little bit about that in the bulletin this coming Sunday, so I hope you take a look. And you're spending time away from the news. Please, duck and cover, right? You know what you need to do. You need to stay inside. You need to stay clean and safe and give yourself distance from others, so you don't need to sort of consume that diet of anxiety that seems to be churning out of our cable stations right now. So read the Bible. Read it with me. Chapter 3, Gospel of John. Powerful stuff. We meet Nicodemus today. Nicodemus is a super interesting guy. Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night. You'll hear the words in a minute as I read the text. But then he shows up later in defense of Jesus in front of the Sanhedrin when he says, "Don't we supposed to try people? Isn't that the way we do things in this nation?" And finally, there at the very end, when he helps bury Jesus in his friend Joseph of Arimathea's brand new tomb there in Golgotha. So I'm glad to meet him, and let's wonder at what he wonders at with Jesus. I'm going to read. Here we go. Chapter 3 of the Gospel of John. Now there was a Pharisee named Nicodemus, a leader of the Jews. He came to Jesus by night and he said to him, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do apart from the presence of God." Jesus answered him, "Very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God without being born from above." And Nicodemus said to him, "How can anyone be born after growing old? Can one enter a second time into the mother's womb and be born?" So let's stop there just for a second and wonder at this conversation. So first of all, it's important to note that Nicodemus comes at night. It reflects a little bit his initial relationship with Jesus, right? He has seen what he's done. Nicodemus is a wise man. Nicodemus studies God. He's a Pharisee. He thinks about God. In a sense, he seeks God. I know the Pharisees get a bad rap oftentimes in the Bible, but they're there. They're asking Jesus these questions. They're super curious because they love God. They're not all bad folks. They're normal folks like you and I, right? Yeah, I talked a little bit yesterday about our heart getting sort of clunked up and how sometimes we need to open it up so how we're living isn't aligned with what God hopes our life will look like. So what God sees and we see in our heart are the same things. Pharisees were just like us, right? Complicated human beings. Nicodemus, no different, maybe better, maybe more noble and honorable than a lot of the people that you and I come across day in and day out. So anyway, he comes at night to ask Jesus a question, to acknowledge that he is in touch with God, right? That Jesus is a holy man. And he says, Jesus answers him. Nicodemus really doesn't ask a question. He just says, "I know you're from God." And it says, Jesus answered him, "Very truly," which means, pay attention. Very, very truly I tell thee, right? Pay attention. No one can see the kingdom of God without being born from above. There's an interesting distinction to be made here between seeing the kingdom of God and being in the kingdom of God. So you know that I would argue that you and I are fully in the kingdom of God at all times and in all places, irrespective of what we believe or think or where we are. This is God's world, made by God. But the challenge that Jesus puts before us today is not to be in it, we are in it, but to see it. to see what it's like and to live in its patterns and beauty. So he says, and to do that, you have to be born again. You have to be born from above. And what he means by that, I think, is that you have to make a choice about how you're going to live. You got to look for it, right? You got to seek it out, right? You have to live into your heart, your spiritual life. That's what he's saying. And Nicodemus, then, a very concrete thinker, like the Pharisees were, says, how can anyone be born after growing old? Can we re-enter the mother's womb? And Jesus, of course, just like you and I know that's not the case. And no, that's not what he's talking about. We got to be born of water and the Spirit. Well, that's our aspiration as well. Those are real baptismal images. And when we get together tomorrow, we'll talk more about what Jesus means when he's saying that. But until then, enjoy the water that's pouring down on the side of your house. I hope you're in your house. It's where we all ought to be right now. Find some time for stillness and Bible reading and maybe even prayer. You got to know you're in my prayers, and I miss you, and I look forward to when I see you again in person. But until then, know that I love you. Peace upon your soul.